I do a lot of walking, so I've been walking the Cambrian Mountains a lot, and I just love landscape. I love the geology, and particularly what interests me is the histories and the stories and the layers that are beneath one's feet as one's walking. Now, I'm close to it in the way that I'm close to it, and I think, like a lot of work, once it's actually emerged, it's gone for me, and I'm already moving on to the next pieces. While for a viewer, it's just such a different relationship, because they will look at it just through their eyes. They probably wouldn't even see what I was wanting to do, or where it was coming from me. So I think just every, and each day that I look at a piece of work, I'll see something different in it and wonder about it. And it'll often, for example, the first couple of weeks or months even of a new piece of work, I don't like it. I'll put it in a corner somewhere, and then I sort of dig it out again and think, that is actually saying something about something. But I think everyone views it in a different way, and each day they view it will be different. Particularly for me, it's around the injustices that have gone on, because somehow those get retained within the land in a way that the sort of the happiness or whatever doesn't seem to. I mean, that's just my take on things. So one time when I was walking, and I just came across all these very, very small mines right up in the sort of high Cambrian Mountains, a teeny little artisanal mines. I just thought, what hell on earth, just the imagining people having to work those. And so from those I then started to gather the materials, thinking how to uncover the stories of those that have worked them. And then I would just go and draw the landscape, and then gather the materials, take those back to the workshop, and create those back in the layers that I found them. So the spoil rocks at the base of the sculpture, then the sort of the bits of the mine workings, and then bits of rock or whatever that I might have found, and then maybe a bit of brick, and going up to the peat at the top, which is often deeper than the seams. And a lot of artistic license within that, obviously. But that's the plan. And then put it in the kiln, and they would fuse or break away or explode or do all sorts of things. But what would come out was a trauma of some sort, and that was because of the fire. But that, to me, reflected the traumas that had gone on in the mines. And each piece, because it was specific to the mine area, it just did reflect that landscape, and it just did somehow. So that was the idea, and then to take, not all of them, because a lot of these sculptures are sort of 8-9 feet high, but there's the ones that I could carry back up. Maybe one day I'll trundle a big one up, and then to just place them back for people to come across and wonder why and what. No, the work is often, the particular work on the mines and in the Cambrian Mountains is based really on the the marks within the landscape that you see as a result of the mines, and how those have changed over time. And that was what first drew me to the ideas. But then also looking at how that's mapped, because you've then got the different, not only routes through, I mean now there's all the sheep tracks and all of those things that sort of go all over the place, but there was the drovers' routes and the miners' routes, and then how the maps were done, and how they look at the landscape. So in that way that there's sort of, it is this multi-layers of things, and what I was wanting to do is to actually try and dig below all of that to the stories of the actual miners themselves, because they just aren't looked at, or the human element. And one of the ways I was looking to do that was looking at the materials within the mine, so all the spoil heaps and everything, and through getting those, initially it was just the spoil heaps, getting all of that material and then putting that in the kiln, somehow the stories of the, it's going to sound a bit corny, but the suffering and the trauma and everything else that went on within those mines would come out in the fire, which in fact it does. And then I went further to looking at the materials that are left on the surface and then going up the mountains, so the peat and everything else, and I put those all in the fire. And then there's just the feeling that actually I needed to take those back, because I'd taken them. In a way, I was also being an exploiter of that land through one, not only my interpretation, but also by taking the materials, that I would then put them back. So the idea of putting the sculptures back where I got the materials from was very much part of the initial concept. But actually taking them back was quite interesting, because once I put them back, they were almost not seen, because they were so much of them. Well, in a way it's obvious, but because they are the materials of the land. But they had transformed in the kiln a lot, and yet they just became totally part of the land again. So it was, yes, and that was all about, the spirits of the mines, and I'm trying to think what the word is when you give them I want to say ablution, that's the wrong word, isn't it? It's sort of a thank you for allowing me to use. It's so much unfinished business, in a sense. It'll just keep going on and on. So it's just a tiny little piece that I put back, and it'll break up. It'll go back into the spoil heap, and it'll become part of that again. In fact, one that I left in Cwmystwyth, I've noticed is already breaking up, and that's great. That's really what's supposed to happen. So that becomes part of the layering of that landscape. Yes, but for me it's the sort of the landscape, the narrative of the landscape underneath as well as across. So it's what's gone on underneath that's really, I find, draws me, but it's also who's walked across that land, and the paths that are left and the marks that are there. And it's constantly changing. So the layering down is constantly changing, and the sort of the images across are constantly changing. So it's one can't ever stop interpreting. The layers were there in my head, I think. They're in the sense of nothing is what it seems, so that there are just layers within everything that we're looking at, whether it's histories or geologies or so that was, in a way, I was trying to make work that would reflect on that, but using materials that within themselves are layered. So clay, for example, it's just got layers of all sorts of different things in it that then get exposed. And when I'm actually making the work, I don't try and layer it beyond just placing it in its visual format. So, as I said, the spoil rocks at the bottom and the peat will be at the top, but actually all sorts of other things happen in between. And often in the kiln, those things sort of almost change positions, because if an explosion takes place, something might then land somewhere else within the piece and embed itself, which I can't have any control over, and nor do I want any control over. So although in my head I've got these ideas of the layerings, and I suppose I choose materials that are intrinsically layered, I actually don't want to have any control over how that comes out in the kiln, because that then to me would be very false and dead and uninteresting. So it's a combination of the two things. Disintegration is an intrinsic part of my work. That that when I'm making it, that it will go back into the land, and it is incredibly vulnerable and fragile on the whole, my work, simply because of all the different materials that are either clinging onto each other in a very fragile way, or just are sort of breaking up, as soon as they've come out of the kiln. So the work is meant to just go back to the land, and I'm really satisfied. That's something I really want to happen, and because again, all the different going back to sort of layering, I suppose, layering of ideas. I was talking about maps and things like that before, and the actual geologies, but also then the archaeology of who's uncovering what when, and how are people interpreting what they're uncovering. It's just that bit of fun, really, when archaeologists look at these sites in 1,000 years' time. That those little bits of work will be in there, and they'll wonder what and why. It's quite nice, sort of messing up that. But so even though it goes back, it's not forgotten. No one might see it, but the land retains that, and that for me is adding then to those layers that are there already. So it'd be nice if they didn't disintegrate immediately, but that is the plan. Yeah. Yes, I think the work, there can't be a start and a stopping point to it, because to the actual work, and when does it... Yes, because otherwise it would need to then stop at that point, and of course it doesn't. So from it emerging from the kiln, or wherever it's emerging from, whether it's a drawing or but kiln in this particular case, then it starts on its own journey. And so yes, at any point of that, because actually almost every time I move the piece of work or anything, something will fall off it, guaranteed. So it is constantly changing all the time. So at any point, whoever's viewing it will see a slightly different piece of work. And if that's a heap of broken up stuff on the ground by a mine, then that is then the work. So no, there isn't a point where you say that's it, which actually makes it extraordinarily difficult to record in a way, because there is that sort of desire to, right, this is this piece of work, And then somebody will say, well, can I see that work? And I say, well, actually, no, because it doesn't exist like that anymore. And people find that rather disturbing. Yeah, or, yes, they don't like that. People tend to want to have a finished piece of work, and that's it, it'll stay like that for forever.